Madam Pandit, you're such a well-known, familiar figure. You belong to sort of India's most illustrious family, perhaps. You've been President of the General Assembly of the United Nations. You've been an ambassador to so many countries. In the extremely unlikely event that someone didn't recognize you and you ran to someone to a social gathering and you had to introduce yourself, what would you say?
Well, first of all, I don't... Of course, you're right in one thing. I do belong to an illustrious family, and I have been fortunate enough to hold positions, and I hope I've done relatively well in them. But apart from that, you know, lots of people now, lots of women now have done much more than I did in my time. The reason why I got publicity was because at that time women had no rights, and I myself suffered on another level, on the financial level. I was married to a very rich man, but I didn't inherit any money because I had no son. So, and that was the reason why in the first Indian elections, my brother made the inheritance one of the major items. But about the other question, how would I introduce myself? Well, as a citizen of India, I suppose.
What about your husband? Your daughter has been on record recently as saying that most people think she was the product of an immaculate conception almost. And not a great deal is known of your husband. Tell us about him.
My
How did you meet
husband
him?
was a scholar. He was not a politician. He belonged to Maharashtra, a very learned family, very well-known family. All over Maharashtra there are scholars and people who made their name through learning. And he was a barrister by profession, and he married me because he was in love with Kashmir.
How did you meet?
Well, we met, he was practicing the law under Sabil Mitter, who was, I think, at that time, he held some high position. And my husband was what they call deviling under him. That's a legal word. And he came to, I think, to see me. But the excuse was he came to consult my father, I don't know, which was true, whichever it was. And whatever it was, he proposed to me on the third day after arrival.
How old were you?
I was 20. I was about to be 20. It was Indira's third birthday, and we were going to have a big party. This was in the old Anand Bhavan, Swaraj Bhavan. And, well, I didn't know what to say because I'd only known him for 3 days. He was very handsome, he was very charming, he had a beautiful voice, he belonged to a family of singers and learned people. And I was just a little bit confused in my mind why he wanted to marry me. And, well, it was in the 1920s.
What about Gandhiji? How did he react to the wedding? Did he come to the wedding?
He was there. He was at the wedding, and he was the first person who blessed us after we were married, and he was very pleased, and he built Ranjit up terrifically in my father's imagination as a good man and a good family and so on. And another strange thing in my wedding was that as soon as I was formally engaged, Gandhiji wrote to my father and said, what is she going to wear to be married in? Those were the days of Khadi. And my mother was absolutely furious. What is this outside? To my mother, he was an outsider. We hadn't accepted him as we afterwards did. And my mother said it's no business of his, and of course she'll wear the traditional pink sari and etc. And amongst the Kashmiris, probably other Hindus also, the jewelry is put in a tray and given in front of the fire, and it becomes legal. And he wrote back and he said, she can't wear anything but khadi. And there was weeping and wailing in our house. My mother was very angry with my father. that you can have this man as your guru in politics. Why does he have to interfere in social matters and our daughter's wedding? Well, anyway, to heal the breach, a few weeks later, a parcel comes from Wardha. No, he was in Sevagram. No, where was he in those days? The first place he was in.
In Wardha, I think.
No, Wardha came later. Wherever he was. Parcel, it was from his wife, from Ba, as we called her. And it contained a beautiful hand-woven sari.
In Khadi.
That she had hand-woven. Fine and very nice. And it was fine enough to be dyed. And it was dyed pink, and I was married in that sari. And another strange event connected with the wedding was, you remember all the talk of celibacy at one time.
Right.
And that was the height of
Gandhi's brahmacharya.
Yes, absolutely. In his paper, all the leading articles were about brahmacharya and his speeches and his talks to people. And he actually separated many husbands and wives. And I know about it because some of them were my friends telling them they must observe brahmacharya. And marriages broke up on that account and so on. So the Kashmiri weddings are all at night. I don't know why, but somehow the gras are always, or probably if they weren't paid enough. Now you can get a marriage in the morning. It depends how much you pay your astrologer. But in those days it was not so. And I was married at midnight or after midnight. And Gandhiji was very tired. He'd had a hectic day. And my father said he ought to go and rest, and that Ranjit and I would go up and ask for his blessing as soon as the ceremony was over. And I don't know if you have any idea of the old Anand Bhavan. There was a whole new wing upstairs built for my brother when he was married in 1916. Very beautiful. And in that veranda, Gandhiji was sleeping. And Ranjit and I went up. And I remember so clearly, little shriveled figure on the bed, and the moonlight was pouring onto him. And it was the month of May, the hottest month in Allahabad. But the wedding was chosen that day because of the threatened arrests. You know, it was a mutiny anniversary, and it was they were afraid the Gandhiji and people who joined the Satyagraha Sabha would be arrested. And indeed they were later on. And so the date was chosen, to very hot and so on. And he asked us to sit down. He sat up in bed. And I remember I sat by his side and he put his arm around me. And Ranjit sat by his feet. And he asked us first ordinary questions. And then he got on to this business of being husband and wife. And my heart was trembling, because I didn't know, I knew what was coming next. I saw Ranjit's face serene, and I had a horrible suspicion that this man will be bulldozed into taking a vow. And what will I do? And so I summoned up courage. It seemed to be an hour, but couldn't have been an hour, because we were only upstairs about 20 minutes. And I said, Bapu, please don't ask us not to live together. And he looked at me very sternly, and he said, why? I said, because I'm married to live with a man, not because to observe any rules. And he slapped my face and laughed, and he said, all right, but see that he does his duty.
Madam Pandit, we were talking about the impetus to change, and there is a sense of frequent despair about the state of the nation, as it were. Do we wait for another Gandhi to come along? Where does change emanate from?
That's a wonderful question. I'm in a bottomless pit of despair myself. So eager for change, I don't see it anywhere. My brother used to say several very pertinent things about democracy, one of which was, everybody in a democracy has a right to fail. Therefore, there should be no problem. You know, they always said, after Nehru what? And he used to get so angry, and he said, so many 100 millions, let them come, let them fail. They've been tried. And there's no frustration either. So the point is, if we wait for another Gandhi, we may have to wait 100 years. People like that, with that all-round capacity that he had. Because it wasn't he was just a saint, he was a politician, and he was able to draw the masses. And that sort of man may not be with us for a long, long time. We may not have another prime minister like Nehru. I'm not saying this because I was his sister, but because I honestly believe he was a very great prime minister. And it's no use waiting.
You know, you live in Dehradun, and you said people come up to you with problems and despairing. What do you say to them?
Well, I don't say what I'm telling you. I say to them, everything is going to be all right.
But do you feel optimistic about India's future in the long term?
Well, in the long run, yes. India can't lose out. She has too much behind her and too much to look forward to. And why does every Indian make good the minute he leaves the Indian shores? He has opportunity. So ultimately I'm not despondent, but I don't see any change coming immediately. I'm just at the present moment, I'm very full of despair, I should say, at the opposition. We have no opposition and don't seem to be able to get one together. And they have all sorts of excuses. I dare say some of them are correct, but that's not enough. An excuse is not enough. A democracy cannot function without dissent. Dissent has to be there in an organized, proper fashion. When I was High Commissioner in London, I was the only High Commissioner who went every week to Parliament, regularly on a certain day, and always if there was anything of importance being discussed. And I was surprised and pleased to see that whatever might happen on the floor of the House, when they went out, say, come and have a drink, old man. Come and have lunch with me. But here are your enemies. The opposition is your enemy. And you can't function like that.
You were ambassador in Stalin's Russia, you've been High Commissioner in London, and you've been ambassador in Washington. What is the most memorable experience that you carry with you, say, from the Soviet Union?
The Soviet Union was a flop so far as I was concerned. I couldn't get on at all. I didn't know any Russian, and Stalin's era was a very harsh era. As a matter of fact, all my posts in my time were difficult in their own way. Of course, Stalin had nothing to do with the Indian embassy, and even when Mahatma Gandhi died, which he did, you know, I was sent to Russia before independence, about a month or two before, and I've never forgiven the government for that because I missed out on all sorts of wonderful things. But there I was, trying to make friends. My daughters spoke Russian. One or two of my members of my staff spoke Russian, but that was an age when they didn't want to come together. I mean, the Russians were not allowed to, and once or twice when people made an approach, they disappeared and so on. So it was for me a sad day, a sad time, yes, I mean a sad appointment. That full of goodwill as I was, full of the desire to work and the ability to work, I wasn't allowed to by the Russians.
What happened in London?
London, of course, was my best post because there was no problem of language and so on. But even in London there were problems. There was the Suez, and when I went to London, the first thing Mr. Churchill said to me after I had presented my credentials, I went to call on him 2-3 days later, have a brandy. No, thank you. I said, not at 9 o'clock. Those days I didn't drink at all. So he said, I can't understand where India is going if it doesn't drink. Well, anyway, then he said to me, because I have accepted you doesn't mean that my views on women have changed. I don't want you putting any ideas into women's heads. And the
What
thought,
did he mean?
he didn't want women in high places, and he would have died if he'd been alive now with Thatcher. But he thought women should be social ornaments, and the odd woman in Parliament, all right, the odd woman doctor and so on. But he had very strict, he said, because I've accepted you, that doesn't mean anything.
Churchill wasn't particularly sympathetic to India, was he?
No, he wasn't. I heard his famous speech, you know, before independence, when he said, if we leave, the streets will be filled with blood.
That's right.
And curious enough, I was going to New York to the UN, to session. I wasn't president then. And when I heard he was going to, Churchill was going to, we all hated Churchill at that time. And I asked to go up. And who do you suppose I was sitting next to? Fatima Jinnah. And wasn't she pleased when he said this? Very pleased, because I think she was thinking the same thing.
Tell us about the United Nations and in your presidentship and being a woman at that time.
You know, I've had so many firsts and such genuine acknowledgement and pleasure from such a large number of people that was one thing that kept me, that enabled me to do my job, whatever it was. Now, I remember when I was going to the United Nations, my brother said India is going to be put up for election, and it may be it's chosen. You are the chief delegate, leader of the delegation. So if India is chosen, you will be. And I burst into tears. My one form of despair or of protest was tears. Now I despise it. I don't know why I did it, why. And my brother said, wipe your tears at once. And remember, if India is elected, you will be. And you know, I had in my delegation all the top people in India.
Were you conscious that you were a woman president?
No, never, never. I've never been conscious of being different from anybody else, because I've never been allowed to think that. Wherever I was, when I was minister, people used to ask this question, journalists particularly. But I was never given the opportunity. I'll tell you a little story. I had two parliamentary secretaries. One was A.G. Kher, who afterwards became Speaker in the UP Assembly. And once it was Chandrabhal Gupta, not Chandrabhan, Chandrabhal. He was Sri Prakashji's brother. And they used to carry in their pocket needles and thread and all sorts of little things in case I wanted them. And it used to make me laugh, because I was always trying to impress on them that this was not the kind of help I wanted. I wanted the help from their minds. And I wanted to be able to argue with them and not accept everything they said. And gradually they learned.
Great orator was your brother.
Never an orator. He repeated himself, and he gave the reason for that when you asked him. He said, I have to talk to the masses, and I have to repeat myself so they understand what I'm saying. And how true that was. Because high-flown Hindi or Urdu would have been no good. But he wasn't an orator. There are many people better orators. But his writing, of course, he is amongst the great writers of the world.
You were so incredibly close to him. Did you feel favored in any way?
Not really, because you know, he always took an opportunity of telling me where I got off. And well, to bring up a subject which I shouldn't mention, Krishna Menon, with whom I didn't get on very well. Once or twice I wrote to him about this. I said, Krishna has done this and that. I thought put obstacles in my way, and they were obstacles. And his letters to me, which are on the record, were, you don't want my love for you to influence my decision. Now, only a very thoughtful and serious and a truthful man would write a thing like that. Because you can be swayed by love.
If you were to sort of evaluate Prime Minister Nehru as let's say, let's start with a human being, what was it about him that moved you and touched you the most?
He was human, very human. I mean, he felt for things that you felt for. You know what I'm trying to say. I mean, things that appeal to you on the human level, he already understood and was trying to work for. And that was a big thing. And the other thing was that he had a cause. He always had causes. And that's a big thing, you know. I know how big I felt when I had a cause. I should still have a cause. The country is full of things that require being built up. But I'm not big enough to pick them up now at this age. But in the days when I was fighting for freedom, and much later when I was ambassador here and there, I had causes which I represented. And it made me feel very good, very able to deal with the situation.
Could you define what was the cause that was dearest to Nehru's heart?
Well, freedom. And by freedom he didn't mean political freedom. He meant freedom. A freedom of all kinds for the human being. And his idea of a free India was not what we have today, but every sort of freedom for the lowest, the poorest, and the people who were not expecting to rise to any great heights. You know, people who had, as all of us, when we joined Gandhiji, we didn't expect anything. We just wanted to do what we were doing because it was our duty, because it was our pleasure also. One thing my brother always said, and I think is very important, when people talked about sacrifice, he said, I've never made a sacrifice in my life, because sacrifice means giving up something you want. I gave up something I didn't want, so it was no sacrifice. And of course, the Indian public used to gape and think he was a very great man, but he was right. What he gave up meant nothing to him. Position, money, power, and he got much more than that through the Indian people. Have you ever seen a copy of his will?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it a beautiful
right.
document?
Mm-hmm.
And that represents his whole personality, his devotion to the Ganga, and yet his dislike of superstition and all that sort of thing. And I think he was a very great man for many reasons, but more a statesman than a politician.
I think there is the feeling, and then you mentioned Krishna Menon, that Nehru was so great a man and so human that sometimes sort of his humanity almost came in the way of his being a successful administrator. How fair a comment do you think that is?
Well, that's a very fair comment, because many people whom he forgave rose to great heights afterwards with the help of people in power. Indira, for instance, had nothing like. She was, I think, a very clever politician, one of the cleverest we've had, but she wasn't a judge of human beings on that level.
You have been one of the few public figures who have walked away, in a sense, from public office and have chosen to retire in Dehradun. What prompted that? Did you just one day throw up your hands in despair
No,
and say...
No, that's a long story, and I've already mentioned it. It's come out in various papers, so there's no need to try and draw a veil over it. It was my disagreement with Indira. She couldn't understand that one could live on two levels. I could dislike your policies on the political level and still have love for you in the relationship. And when I started disagreeing with her politically, which came to a head during the emergency, I couldn't bear it anymore. But long before that we had partly separated.
You're 87 years old. What would you like the rest of your life to be like?
Just peaceful. I've had so much, and now I live in a beautiful house, and I have my Nayantara and Chandralekha live in Dehradun. Nayantara in my extension, she's built at my own house. Chandralekha just down the road, and my youngest daughter comes and visits me. So I am happy, but in many ways I am a frustrated woman. When I think of 20 years when I did nothing, when I should have been doing something, it was my weakness, undoubtedly. I should have fought against all the things that were coming in the way. I didn't, and now I feel it, but too late at 87.
Thank you very much, madam.
Thank you. I've enjoyed this.
Thank you.